The Hidden Benefits of Breaking and Entering by Mothmothhmothh. Summary. Someone has been breaking into the support course classrooms after hours. Rather unintentionally, Power Loader discovers who. There was a screeching sound coming from the vents, Majima noticed. Usually, in such a situation, he'd assume it was Nezu. But he'd had a recent issue revolving around supplies moving around during the night, meaning the logical next step to take was, evidently, to turn the lights off and hide under the desk until the intruder arrived. The movement grew closer, rattling through the ceiling until a brief moment of silence was the only time given for Majima to take a deep breath before one of the ceiling tiles shifted, creating space for a masked figure to descend from above, dropping down and silently assessing his surroundings. After spotting nothing of note, somehow missing the hero's large helmet piece poking out from behind his hiding spot, he chucked down what appeared to be damaged support gear, selecting a range of tools from the designated places around the classroom. It was a practice motion, fluid in nature, and Majima found several questions simultaneously answered. "I take it you're our new secret visitor?" He slunk out of his hiding place, arms crossed in his typical "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed" stance. The boy startled, leaping an impressive height back into the ceiling, mystery gear carelessly abandoned. With speed only possible due to years of hero work, Majima leapt after him, dragging the boy back down. He reached for the stranger's mask, stopped before the motion could be completed by violent kicks hastily delivered to his ribcage. Not dissimilar to the reaction one might expect from an agitated rabbit, with rather worrying strength. Thanks to this reaction, the masked figure was able to slip away, disappearing from sight within seconds. The teacher stood, still for a moment, eye catching on the discarded equipment left behind. With far less hesitance than sensible, he approached the lightly mangled gear, turning it over in his hands, granted no additional information on anything regarding the item or its owner. Cautiously, he placed the object in one of his desk drawers, handling it like a priceless artifact, and not the scrap remnants of a broken project. 1 week had passed since Midoriya had last entered the support course. His patience has long since run out, only the nagging voice of anxiety keeping him away. That voice was silent now, however, and Midoriya found himself sinking through his typical route, slowly pausing every 3 knee shuffles to check for outside sounds. Only silence greeted him, though, and his journey was uninterrupted. After moving the ceiling tile, he waited painstakingly, shaking mildly with how tense his muscles were, ready to launch in the other direction at the slightest warning. At the lack of any evidence of life, Midoriya slowly dropped down, landing softly on the tiled floor. With skilled precision, Midoriya began his work. Selecting his usual plethora of tools and prying open a space in the wall he discovered several minutes earlier. From the little hole he pulled out several incomplete projects, keeping an eye out for any movement as he worked, slowly making progress. Lost in his work, by the time he glanced at the classroom clock, he couldn't hold back the violent wince at what it displayed. With a deep sigh, he packed away his borrowed items, carefully placing them back in their respective places. Just as quietly, just as hastily as he arrived, Midoriya left. A blanket of silence descended upon the room, motionless as the faint rustling in the vents grew more distant. Once the dregs of sound outside died, Majima stretched out, crawling out from the space behind the whiteboard at the front of the room that he most certainly did not create for the sole purpose of keeping an eye on Yue's peculiar visitor. After several minutes of cracking his joints and checking that his circulation wasn't permanently fucked, he sidled over to where the teenager had been tinkering. Opening up the compartment in the wall, he pulled out the support items the boy had been working on. They were interesting, with the lack of a better word. Not that they weren't well made, more that it was painfully and undeniably obvious that the creator was self-taught via the odd video online. Pulling a small screwdriver from one of his pockets, Majima tightened a single screw in an unnoticeable amount, aligning all the X-shapes perfectly. Putting the gear back where he found it, he fished out his phone to send a single message to Nezu. Midoriya did not abandon his caution completely, waiting 3 days until he next returned to the support course classroom. Tugging out his main project, Midoriya turned it over in his hands, a mild frown on his face. His hands stilled as he reached the aligned screws, freezing mid-motion. As if handling an explosive substance, Midoriya released his project, taking a long step back towards the opening in the ceiling. From behind the whiteboard, Majima emerged, falling to the ground in the process, but neither party acknowledged that, revealing himself to the masked intruder. In a manner nigh identical to a deer in headlights, Midoriya froze. As if approaching a concerned animal, Majima held out his arm, a small lunchbox occupying his hand, extended in a clear offering. Midoriya, rather understandably, hesitated, shifting on his feet in an indecisive motion. After a long pause, void of sound or movement, as if the earth had held its breath, he lunged forwards, scantily close enough to touch the box and, with surprising gentleness, acquired the item safely. Once it was solidly in his possession, he leapt for the ceiling, scrabbling away as if his very being depended on it. Upon his eventual arrival at home, he cautiously opened the lid to reveal a small, hand-made array of food. He stood, staring silently for a moment or two. With practiced ease, he ignored the blurring of his vision. It was impossible to miss the lights in support course being on, but Midoriya dropped down into the classroom anyway. Majima offered the teenager a small grin and a nod of approval before continuing with the work on his computer that should have been completed a minimum of a month ago. From behind the screen, the teacher watched him work, fluidly in a manner that reminded the hero of a dancer, almost, hands gliding over the tools before settling on the one required. Every time he glanced up from the borderline torturous lesson plan to check in on the boy's progress, he felt a smile creep onto his face. After an hour or so, he opened up his desk drawer, pulling out a box identical to the one he'd previously given the teenager. He was almost certain the aforementioned teenager had something to do with the spate of incapacitated villains that had been turning up in the surrounding area recently, due to minor, read major, consistencies in outfit and demeanor, but that didn't really matter at the moment. He cleared his throat in an attempt to gain the probably, maybe, most certainly Vigilante's attention. It was a fruitless effort, and Majima ended up walking over to his workstation to deliver the item. He looked up from his work, regaining awareness of his surroundings. The teacher displayed the box, and a flash of indiscernible emotion passed over Midoriya's face. Feigning indifference, he grabbed it, shooting Majima a hesitant smile that was, in fact, not visible from underneath his mask. The gesture was somehow picked up on, and the hero returned to his desk with a newfound sense of accomplishment. Only the background droning of metal on metal and keyboard typing filled the room, staving off silence for the next hour or so. With one final motion, Midoriya's project was complete. He held the orbish object up, admiring it under the glaring classroom lights. Majima glanced over, curiosity piqued. "Finished?" he asked, abandoning his desk to join the teenager. Acknowledging the question a second or two too late, Midoriya nodded. Majima grinned, a mischievous expression that suited his features. Midoriya was, suddenly, quite relieved to be on friendly terms with the man. "What's this piece of work do?" he asked, admiring it like a fine jewel. Midoriya didn't get the chance to respond, however, as the activation switch was gleefully pressed by the hero's gloved hand, a low hissing sound emitting from the sphere as the sedative spilled out. It was only thanks to the mask Midoriya specifically designed that he remained conscious. Power Loader, however, was less lucky. A wince was all the teenager had to offer as Majima collapsed to the floor, asleep. "Guess the efficiency increase was effective," he mused offhandedly, mildly surprised by the quick loss of consciousness. He slipped the offending item into his pocket, making a mental note to reload it later. With more effort than anticipated, Midoriya managed to drag the man to his seat, draping him over like a soggy towel. He stared blankly at the man, barely withholding judgment on the unique hero outfit he settled upon. After a moment of careful consideration, he shed his jacket, positioning it like a small, stab-proof blanket. Admiring his handiwork, he allowed himself a smile, turning back to his workstation to pack away the unfinished projects and misplaced tools. Rather unfortunately, it was only after he'd long left UA's building and was actively crawling through his bedroom's window that he recalled his mother's tendency to write his name in most articles of clothing. After a moment frozen in fear, he shrugged. He was somewhat certain that his jacket had escaped such treatment. Back at UA's support course classroom, the aforementioned jacket innocently lay in its draped position, small, tidy writing on the label proudly stating, "Not the property of Midoriya Izuku," complete with a small heart. That night, Midoriya slept soundly, unaware of the identity-exposing article of clothing. In a stroke of nothing more than dumb, unadulterated luck, when Majima finally awoke, groggily and wearily, he was in no state to even consider taking notice of such a detail. With a toothy yawn and a deep sigh, Majima tapped the spacebar of his computer and returned to his long-procrastinated lesson plans. Several hours after waking, Midoriya stumbled downstairs, barely avoiding slipping on his half-on sock. Inko was on a call in the kitchen, although Midoriya hadn't seen the side of her in a long time. Not as though that was a bad thing, the opposite in fact. He smiled softly at the scene, and she spotted him, holding her hand over the phone to muffle the caller's hearing. "How was the library?" She stepped closer, pulling him to a half-hug. "Good," he responded, sneaking a slice of the fruit she'd been cutting. She shot him a glare, lacking any heat, and he held back a chuckle. "You heading out soon?" The teenager nodded. Inko brushed a lock of hair out of his face. "Make sure to keep safe, okay? Mitsuki mentioned some robber in the area." She sighed nostalgically. "When I was your age, I was always getting into fights." Midoriya glanced to the side nervously. "Getting into trouble with the police and such." She placed a hand on his head soothingly. Midoriya blinked owlishly at the information drop that had come out of seemingly nowhere. "Don't wait to call for help if you need it, okay?" "Well," Midoriya shrugged. "Remember to check where I am if you're worried." A week before beginning his mild vigilantism, he'd taken the initiative to encourage his mother to install an app informing her of his location as a simple precaution in case he were to get stabbed or severely injured. After the brief conversation died out and the two split ways, Inko returned to her call, waiting for Midoriya to leave earshot before continuing. "He's got no fucking clue, I know." A crisp laugh drifted down the line. "I'm sure he'll be out this evening." She paused. "If you'd like to come over." The laugh returned, louder and bolder. "See you at 11 then, Inko." Nomori's flirtatious voice cracked slightly over the call. The birds were silent. Midoriya winced slightly at every sound as he tugged his window open. His clock attempted to warn him of the unseemly time, an action that was skillfully ignored by the teenager, disregarding the blazing red digits beckoning him back in. Lounging on the sofa with a glass of wine in one hand and several strands of midnight blue hair in the other, Inko stared at the multiple screens currently displaying the security footage of the surrounding buildings. Midoriya stuck his head out from behind the wall he was currently hiding behind, staring cold into the back of the criminal's hood. His hand drifted to his tool belt, but before he could take a single step forwards, a small pebble assaulted him, landing a hit on his elbow, albeit accidentally, with impressive accuracy. After a short moment, 3 or so minutes, involving absolutely no rolling on the floor and silent tears, he regained his composure. This was near instantly greeted with a second stone smashing into his shin. An additional brief recovery later, he stared at the location he assumed the projectiles came from, locking eyes with none other than Higari fucking Majima. He pointed at the teacher, jaw dropped in something similar to a smile. The hero pointed back, expression identical, making a motion that Midoriya was unable to decipher. He held up a finger in a pause, fishing in his pocket until his hand brushed against a certain orbish object. He tugged it free, pressing the button on the side, and lobbing it at the criminal with the rage he previously directed at Majima, landing a solid hit on his head and sending him straight to a one-on-one meeting with the cold pavement below. A wave of realization washed over him as he recalled exactly what had happened to the 7th floor in the sport gear, but, with luck befitting a saint, or perhaps the finder of a 9-leaf clover, his shot had managed to soundly knock out the criminal. Midoriya shot a guilty look at the hero, who promptly jumped down from the rooftop, somehow avoiding catching his gauntlets on the ledge. He shed one of the aforementioned gauntlets in order to reach into his shoddily modified pocket on his oversized and evidently unworn t-shirt, pulling out a pair of reinforced handcuffs and securing them around the criminal's wrists, finishing off the encounter by pressing a button on his headgear. Dangling their feet on the edge of the rooftop like misbehaving children, Majima and Midoriya sat as the lights of the police van faded away, the boxed lunch between them slowly depleting. Midoriya still managed to keep his mask on, of course, bunching it up above his mouth to fully indulge in the shared meal, as the light of the hero's phone cast large shadows across the flat surface they were sitting on. "How's school?" Majima tried awkwardly. Midoriya shrugged. "Fine. You finished those lesson plans yet?" Majima choked on his food, taking a moment to recover. Tensely, as if preparing to encounter a wild animal, he opened his mouth. "How's home?" Midoriya ignored the odd behavior. "Pretty great." Relief visible, Majima cracked a smile, eyes hidden behind his hair, headgear cautiously placed on the floor behind the pair. Any room for an extra parent? The teacher laughed freely. I'm afraid my mother's got her eye on someone, but I won't say no to the addition of a weird uncle, I guess. The hero nudged Midoriya in mock anger. Says the teenage vigilante. They sat there for a while longer, peaceful. With a sigh worthy of a battle-hardened warrior, Midoriya clutched at the lower end of his mask, still rolled just under his nose, tucking it up in one swift motion. His eyes scrunched up as he awaited a reaction. A disbelieving chuff was the first response. He forced his eyes open. You're literally in the heroics course. Exactly what was the point of becoming a vigilante? Midoriya shrugged mildly. Guess I'm just an impatient guy. Majima's phone buzzed, and he turned it over to see the message. You're just a stone's throw away from adoption now, my dear employee. Nezu's smug demeanor was somehow perfectly translated through text. Back at the Midoriya household, Inko sighed sweetly, arm draped over her sofa mate. Guess it's a good thing he's got a spare emergency contact. Midoriya never got his jacket back. It was decimated in a lava explosion completely unrelated to both him and his freshly acquired uncle.